You're listening to the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT podcast. I'm your host and curator, Rabbi Abram Kibalevich, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Shalom, this is To Stir with Love, a criminal justice reform podcast. And for those that have been listening over the last couple of weeks, we've had, I think everyone realizes that listening to music, especially if it's music that stirs a chord in them from the past, can diffuse a situation, can help them cope with a situation. And I want to discuss with who we have with us tonight, this idea about how is it happening? Can it happen more? And are there ways that we can introduce music? Obviously, this is not about reforming the actual laws, but assuming that incarceration continues, can we maximize the amount of situations where music is being played, not just piped in music, but specifically I want to talk about live music, the excitement of live music and what that does for us. We have with us again, first, of course, Rabbi Yitzchak Kolakowski, who is, of course, the head of chaplaincy in Waymart Prison, and he knows quite a bit about programs where music has been offered. We also have with us Rabbi Yamin Shaiman, who, as you know, is the chief executive officer and the creator of that outfit known as Hinda Helps, that deals with prisoners from all situations from before, from the incarceration and afterwards. And we have David with us, and David's been with us before. And David has not only been an incarcerated individual, he's someone who, when I asked him about this subject, felt very excited about contributing here, because he had actually been involved in with concerts and music in prison, and he knows about its very positive effects. Poiskin Bekovet Achsanya. We'll start, I guess, with in a sense, with our hosts and the people that are helping host us. Rabbi Yitzchak, did you want to comment first about what happens? Why don't you tell us a little bit, Yitzchak, what happens over there in Waymart?
Today, as I was leaving work, I'm the supervisor for all the different religions. So one of the Protestant Christian pastors who I supervised was sitting and practicing for the church service with the guitar and singing a hymn, getting ready for a service that was later this evening. Historically, that's how Johnny Cash got connected to Folsom Prison. He actually never served in Folsom Prison. His incarcerations were only one night each. There were 7 different times that he was arrested for some minor misdemeanors, like picking flowers in a public park in Mississippi, things like that. And he actually saw a movie in 1951 about Folsom Prison, a dramatic film, and that's what inspired him to write the song about Folsom Prison. What happened was that about 10 years later, there was a church that he was attending, and the pastor there was a Reverend Floyd Gressett, who was also a chaplain there in Folsom, asked Johnny Cash, who at the time felt like he'd already been a little bit past his prime at first, but actually found really after recording in Folsom Prison, kind of had his big comeback and became very popular once again, maybe more popular than he was earlier. So that was actually the connection of how he.
So in other words, he was brought to the prison sort of as a church, as an aspect of what the pastor wanted him to come, right? And yep. This was when Johnny, and again, this is not a show about Johnny Cash, but I think it's important to note that his entry into the prison was almost as an evangelical person, right? He was coming in a way to sing, but also to spread the word of the Lord. Was that true?
that was his first visit was invited by his pastor, and then it was once he was there and he was so well received by the inmates, that's when he decided two
So,
years later to come back and make the
okay,
recording.
so Yitzchak, we know that in your prison, although not all state prisons are that way, there are, like you say, a number of musics and music situations, whether it's a concert, a solo performance. Does it all go through the religious, official like yourself, or does it go through, the activities person? How does that work?
It depends on whether it's a religious performer or not. And so, in general, most of the concerts, this is all pre-COVID. We haven't had any actual concerts since COVID started. Although, still, we can talk about how even the activities department found ways to work through that. But
Okay, well, let's imagine
generally,
COVID hasn't happened yet. Go back to before COVID. Before COVID, when concerts would occur, when music would there be a music concert stage? Did it go through? Was it through you or through the activities director?
if it was a totally secular performer, it would go through the activities director. And if it was in somehow a religious performer, I kind of felt that some of these should have gone through the activities department, and some of the other prisons, it's all handled by the activities department. But it fell on my shoulders to facilitate the religious musicians, and so I know we had some interesting experiences. I guess everybody has their own taste in music, and I remember we had some very nice Mennonite singers who would come and sing Christian hymns and do their ministry work, and I felt that was more. And they would come every year. I felt that was more in line with what the chaplains were called to do, and they would maybe bring a banjo or something or a guitar, nothing major. But then I remember there was one band. I don't need to mention them by name, but they they wanted to come and perform, and they said that they were a Christian band, and they had to bring all kinds of uh, equipment. And I asked, well, if you're coming to bring a message, you don't need all this equipment. They said, well, we want to give the inmates an experience that was identical to what you would have going to a concert out on the street. And I was a new chaplain at that time, and I was a little nervous.
Your experience indicates that on one hand, an idea is, well, we can make these inmates feel better people by giving them religious music and religious performers. And this is a way to sort of like bring God to them, whether it was Johnny Cash bringing them or your Mennonite people. And this is a way that we could, through music. In other words, we can't necessarily hit them over on the head with the Bible, but maybe the ideas of the Bible, if they're sung to music properly, or the Quran, or whatever religious book there is. And that's one way to look at why this is important. But if we go back to the original quote that I started with, soothing the savage breast, just the idea that it's a calming thing. And in many ways, I'm going to push back and say there are many incarcerated individuals that don't necessarily want to get more more preaching done to them and more saying you should be a better person, but rather the music in a way can transport them. It can at least make them feel that they aren't as suffering as much as they thought they were. It could actually perhaps summon up a beautiful moment in their past. So instead of hearing some sort of new age or country version of, of how someone comes to Jesus, what they could just hear about is, they can hear some song that was important to them when they were growing up, and they could hear it, and it could somehow resonate with them, and they could be taken back to that innocent time before they committed the crime, and that could somehow make them just feel better, and in that way, it's not necessarily from a religious standpoint. I mean, we have three rabbis here: myself, you, and Rabbi Shimon, and all of us would like everything we do to be, about getting the Torah, getting God, getting the religion to them. But maybe we need to think about music's power beyond that, and why all of us, I think, all of us here, I would assume anybody who's going to download this episode has certain strands of music that they could probably summon back up to themselves, and they'll probably find themselves crying over it and not even realizing why. And I think having more of that in prison, I think, can soothe the situation. So instead of necessarily taking Soma, like using Aldous Huxley's from Aldous Huxley's book Brave New World and stuffing it through the vents, we can have them come to create concerts where perhaps this could happen. Rabbi Shimon, you've been silent here. What do you think? Do you think that do you think there should be more music? Do you have experience with music being played at in any of the facilities you've been at?
Number one, yes, I've had experience. I wanted to mention, to your earlier point, there's a famous story of the Muddsher Rebbe once had to have a surgery, and instead of a sedative, he asked the doctor to allow him to really get into a certain niggin. While he was singing the niggin, they were able to do the surgery, and he felt no pain. So you see over there, where music could lift a person above even the pain of a surgery, certainly inside incarceration.
Yes. Especially emotion.
I mean, you read many stories of not incarceration, but unfortunately for the Jewish people, stories during the Holocaust and concentration camps where nigunim played a big part, even Yidden in the most dire situations, marching into their death. The monsters that were doing this to them couldn't even understand why are they singing and why are they marching and where. So that definitely the nigunim, the song, the music, if under those conditions, it played a great part. So certainly in an American prison or a jail, in Cook County Jail, more than once I brought musicians in. They've let me bring in entertainment for Hanukkah. When I go to the state prison, most of the time, chaplaincy and LTS, the leisure time activities, are housed in the same unit. So there wasn't one time when I went back where I didn't see guys in the band room. They're all housed together. It's like a part and parcel of inside the Illinois State Prison's music. And, let's forget about pandemics. On Sundays, on different occasions, there were concerts, they practiced, and it was not just religious music, it was music just for the general population. And it did a lot of, had a great effect of bringing a calm into the prison and a different atmosphere. It did have a great effect.
We're going to get into this. We'll get into this with David specifically, but
LTS area, there's a band room that is for in-house. Mm-hmm. There was always a group of individuals in custody in those rooms, and it was all in-house. It was not outside performers, and there was great talent. I had guys that would come to my Jewish service that were actually part of the band. They would have to go out or apologize. They have to go out to practice. One guy was the drummer. So yes, in every prison there is a band room, and just like there's an art room, there's a band room, and they usually house together. Leisure time and chaplaincy are housed together. The weightlifters, the musicians, and the artists are all housed in the same building.
So you found, and Yitzchak, you can comment on this as well, that the COs and the wardens were pretty understanding in letting the incarcerated individuals have their release, not only to practice the music, but even to perform it as well for the other inmates, right? They understood this was important, and that is, we've talked a lot about the negatives about life, but at least in Waymart and what Rabbi Shimon has seen, it sounds like they get it. It sounds like they understand that this is an important element, and they're allowing the prisoners the chance to be creative. Am I correct in restating what you said, Yitzchak?
And our activities director, he on his emails, he has his little signature. It says, we keep them busy so they don't keep you busy. That's part of the idea, is that there are all kinds of activities, whether video games and sports and lifting weights, and certainly music and art are part of that, and we certainly have a lot of talented musicians. And I think at one time there was a secular band or choir part, and that was eliminated, and that really drew a lot of people to become more involved in the church. Now, in the Protestant church, music, they have, guitars and drums and singers, and they have a very talented, choir and soloists. And I remember, we'd have a Thanksgiving program, or sometimes I'd have to sit in for the Protestant service, and we had very talented singers there. But there is sometimes, and not only singers, I'll tell you, we had another ministry program where they came in and helped the inmates put on a show. I think we discussed that before, which was both music and spoken word and drama and dancing. And it was a Christian ministry, but they welcomed anybody, and the inmates actually wrote their own dramatic performances and things, and they performed it, and also with a lot of equipment to be very professional and everything. And it was actually, quite a nice program that gave the inmates the opportunity to shine. And it's not only Christians. So you mentioned the Quran. Our Salafi Muslims think that music is haram, or they associate that with the Sufis and other groups, that they are not really comfortable with music, as opposed to our imam coming from Turkey, where they have a rich musical culture.
So it's really
are not, but the Native Americans, certainly music is central to their devotion.
So I have two questions here, and I want, when you have a big event that everybody's there, in a way, I can see security being worried on one hand. The second thing I'd like to ask, and David, I want you to come in on this, is, Yitzchak has mentioned, and we've heard from Rabbi Shaim, we've had Jewish music. We've talked about Christian music. We talked about Johnny Cash and his Southern music or country music. We've talked here about Turkish music from the imams. There's so many, music has become so varied. When you have a prison population that has from so many different types, is it realistic for today's time for everybody to enjoy like one concert? Doesn't it seem like we're so look, the prison population mirrors what we have in the outside world. In the outside world, everyone's listening to their iPad or listening to their iPhone on their playlist, and everyone is different than the other person. I would assume in prison it's going to be hard to satisfy them. So, David, why don't you come in and respond?
But
to this?
they just 1 second. They also have their iPads in the prison that they can listen to.
I understand, but
yeah,
no iPads in the federal prison.
No iPads there.
No.
So, David, talk about the two things.
But let me comment on both of your points. Initially, let me say, with respect to the security issue, and that's a very good point. Generally speaking, it's a very relaxed atmosphere on these holidays when these bands, and I had mentioned to you before we came on tonight, Rabbi, that it was customary at all the prisons I was at several large federal prisons, that they would have a series of concerts, you name it, reggae, rap, classical, you name it, they had it, rock and roll. And inmates can choose one or more or none. They can choose to attend. These would go throughout the day. Now, security by and large was very loose on those days, except I do recall at FCI Loretto, the first prison I was in Western Pennsylvania, one of the guys in the band screamed out something of like, against the COs, and he was put in the shoe immediately and was accused of inciting a riot, a 100 series shot, and got transferred to a maximum security prison.
Was he, in other words, this was one of the inmates who was performing?
Yeah, and he just made some remark at the end of a song, like kind of screamed out. And the view of the COs, the correctional officers, was that could incite a riot, which it theoretically could. It didn't. People were laughing, but they took him right off stage, took him to the shoe, and transferred him.
Wow.
So that is one event. When you mentioned the security, it came to my mind. But commenting just more generally,
Maybe he should have just said, "I've got blisters on my fingers."
yeah, exactly.
That would have been good enough.
He would have stayed at the prison with that comment.
I've got blisters on my fingers. I think George Harris, I don't know who said that, but someone did.
But I do have to say, because when I first came into the prison system, there were no MP3 players. We don't have what the state prisons have with those computers or the tablets. So music, there's two kinds of music, of course. There's the MP3 players where you're listening, and that's helpful to inmates. But the live music, and I agree with rabbis here, both of whom have witnessed it. And I agree, Rabbi Kolakowski made a good comment that I was completely consistent with what I've lived with too in prison, which was the responsibility fell on the chaplain when it was a religious related music affair. Otherwise, in my case, it was always recreation who would set up all of the music otherwise. But it was very, very soothing, and it was very uplifting, I have to say, as Rabbi Scheinman said, in an environment where, I often say this, you may not be depressed all the time in prison, but there's very rarely a feeling of joy, actual joy. But in those instances, there were tremendously talented musicians, as Rabbi Kolakowski was alluding to at times. I mean, I was amazed at the level of talent and impressed with the prison's commitment to buying very good quality equipment at each of these prisons for these musicians. So there was really, really good quality of music. And, these were days, as I said before we came on tonight, that I and many of the inmates looked forward to very much because we had so little to look forward to. So it was very uplifting. And I have to say, this is where I would give the prison a little bit of kudo here, the prison system, to allow that, because they don't have to, of course. So there must be a little bit of compassion there to at least allow the inmates on occasion on these holidays. And it was the main holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. There would be day long, from literally, I would say noon till 7, 8 at night of concerts ongoing and really enjoyable shows. So very, very positive.
Well, what's interesting, you mentioned the federal prisons. One of my advisors on this program has served time in a state prison in New York State. And he told me that, and he was an Orthodox Jewish man, and he told me that they couldn't even get what we call Malava Malka, which of course is the Saturday night accompanying the Sabbath Queen into the week. And they couldn't get two guys with a guitar. The prison wouldn't allow two guys with a guitar to come. And they had 8 or 10 people. They clamped down. He said he was there for a number of years in the state prison in Woodburn, Yitzchak. I think that's where it is, in Woodburn. There's a prison there, I think. And
near me. Yeah.
And he couldn't get anything. He said they never had any concerts. And he said it was, concerts. That was, it seems that the federal prison system, as we've talked about before, is way ahead. Yitzchak's prison in Pennsylvania seems to be exceptional. Rabbi Scheinman talks about in Cook County. Scheinman and Yitzchak, can we say for people listening here that they could maybe attempt to visit prisons and if they have a band, they have a group, an a cappella group, which you don't need that many instruments for, if any, then maybe we should try to encourage this to happen more, because and maybe this is some way, under the right supervision, that it can happen. And this is the type of thing, there is singing talent everywhere. Maybe this is the type of thing that we should try to push more among all different denominations. Rabbi Scheinman, what do you think? Is this a type of push that we could make an attempt to to inspire people to do this?
Yeah, well, I think you misunderstood.
We're looking for ways to make things better. Maybe this is an option, especially for chesed projects. There are people looking for ways. What can they do to help the incarcerated? Well, how about arranging, if you are talented, to come to prisons and performing there? When I was the Rav Machshir and rabbinic supervisor of a nursing home, I would try to get young people to come to the nursing homes to give something, to give a shot of energy and life and happiness. do you think this is something we could start pushing for various prisons if it could be managed based on security issues? What do you think, Rabbi Shimon?
I think it's a wonderful idea. I think that there are groups going in. There's a rabbi, he's not living anymore, a friend of mine. He would arrange every year for Purim to bring in a band to Rikers Island. He would bring in.
By the way, that was one of the places my friend says is one of the worst. I don't know if it's as bad as Cook County, but I heard that Rikers is terrible. So, and as far as what you heard, were they able to bring the band to Rikers?
They were, yeah. Every year you'd bring it in, bring them. The Piamentas, I think, went in. He brought the Piamenta band in.
And if I can add, by the way, my last year at FCI Milan in Michigan, the chaplain brought in the choir from the University of Michigan. It was incredible. It was what a night it was. I mean, and there was security that was tight, but all these students came. It was, I would say, 50 choir participants, and it was a beautiful night. I mean, so my experience is it happened quite often. So there has been a push, even from within. I think there's a recognition by many of the chaplains and administrators that see, from their perspective, it's going to add to the relaxation and lessen the amount of tensions if you can do this on occasion. So, I mean, I want to be a little cynical here. I don't think they're doing it just to be kind. I think they're doing it to make their own lives a little easier too, to make things a little less stressful.
Sure, it's sort of like when the teacher puts on a movie. When he doesn't have to teach. I get it. Would you say, I had a discussion with Yitzchak a couple of days ago about this topic when we were thinking about it. Yitzchak felt that he wasn't sure if high schools, maybe that's too young. I think that was Yitzchak's at least initial impression, that perhaps high school guys, high school age students, perhaps that's too young. Do you agree, David and Rabbi Shimon, that maybe if there is going to be this volunteerism, you should be old enough to withstand what it means to visiting a prison?
Well, let me say this, by the way. Again, in my 6 years at FCI Milan, on regular occasions, the prison gave tours to high school students through the prison. Now, I'm not talking about performing for the prisoners, but I'm talking about it was common for high schools to be touring the prison.
Oh,
so they, on a regular basis, there would be touring of students that age. So
was that part of the scared straight policy, or was that sort of just like to go to a museum? I mean, what was the idea?
I think so. I think more of the latter, just for educational purposes, understanding the real world and, getting a sense of, and it was, everyone was very respectful. And I think, and they actually looked very relaxed. Everyone was very relaxed. Now, keep in mind, by the way, I would want to say I was only at minimum security prisons. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Kolakowski would have a better sense of if my sharings here about my experiences with music, does the same apply in the high level security prisons? The two of you rabbis would have a better sense, because my experience was entirely in low security. I'm assuming they allow music throughout, but I don't know.
But maybe they wouldn't let high school students tour a maximum security prison.
No, I'm sure probably not.
Right. And that might be for the safety of the students, correct?
Correct.
Right. I mean, David, I know one of the prisons you've told me this when we weren't recording, and I looked this prison up, was the Morgantown prison in Morgantown, right? The federal.
Yeah, the camp there, the FCI Morgantown
right.
in West Virginia. Yeah.
I think they call it Camp Fed, right, or something like.
Well, there was a piece they did on 60 Minutes actually, because at the time they had an in-ground pool and a golf course, 9 holes, and after airing that was the end of the pool and the golf course.
Oh no, but, they filled the pool up afterwards.
Yeah, Mike Wallace ended up being the snitch and turned the place into a regular prison again.
You know what? I have such respect for Mike Wallace. He's got a very Jewish, dogged method of approaching things and analyzing things. But boy, he has done a lot. He did a lot in terms of his gotcha.
That was the end of the swimming days at FCI Morgantown.
In other words, they didn't want you to think that the people who were put in prison were enjoying themselves too much.
Exactly.
But they
But
did,
now but I was there many years later. I was there 10, 15 years
but they
later.
did have, as you said, they had an auditorium that was large enough for concerts consistently, correct?
Yes, and in fact, they showed movies there, and then they would have music events there, including karaoke on a regular basis, which I participated in, and it was enjoyable. I mean, I have to say,
So the
it really
karaoke
was.
was sort of like a talent show type of thing, right?
Exactly. Well, more like the Gong Show, I guess you could say,
Yes.
because there was probably more booing than cheering, particularly for old guys like me.
Right. So I would assume, just based on our conversations, that you were taking standards from the Great American Songbook, but that doesn't
Yeah,
that
that's
doesn't play
correct.
so much with the younger generation. I don't think they know Body and Soul or One More for the Road. I don't think they know much about that.
One more for the road. It was what took me off the stage, I think. But
That was what you were singing up.
yeah, it didn't go over well, I have to say.
Um, but I guess that's my other question. I mean, most Yitzchak and Rabbi Shimon, you can confirm on this. Most of the incarcerated individuals today are probably in their 20s and 30s. Would we say that's probably correct?
I would say so.
Yeah. So most of these 20 and 30-year-olds of today are not interested in old Sinatra ballads or stuff. Right. So can we say that perhaps, and again, without demeaning anything, of course, that there is, the hip hop and gangster lyrics. Those are the type of things which I guess, don't necessarily jive with, soothing a savage breast. Yitzchak, what do you think? I mean, let's say you have a prison of 20 and 30-year-olds, and let's say 50% are African American, let's say, which is, I think, the normal, proportion.
Yeah.
So
way more different than that. Yeah.
So maybe, there might be some censorship about what sort of concerts are proper, right? Again, if if the concerts are full of expletives and, and statements about that sort of like imply aspects of violence, I don't suppose that would would be the type of thing that the COs and the prisons would want to, to be glorifying, right?
That's part of everything with the religious department as well. We have to be worried about glorifying violence, whether we're talking with the Nation of Islam or Odinist or any of these other groups. We have to kind of keep an eye open, make sure. So it's the same thing with the activities department as it is with the religion
So you're
department.
saying there might be some messages. In other words, even to stuff to us that sounds benign, there might be some messages in the lyrics that might be sending something dangerous. Is that what you're saying, Yitzchak?
Yeah, it's something that has to be taken into consideration. I mean, I don't remember any hip hop concerts, but I do remember like R&B type concerts, and I remember this one Jewish fellow from Philly, a Russian Jew who was there, and he was kind of upset because he wanted to go to this concert, and he was on the call out for the rabbi's shiur or whatever, and he said, "Oh, take me off that. I want to go to the concert, and I'm going to miss the concert because I'm on this call out. You need to." So it's
So I mean, based on our conversation tonight, that might have been better for him spiritually, right? I'm sure you give a great cheer, and you would
no, it
have.
wasn't my shiur. It was the Lubavitcher rabbi, but it was
Okay, well then I don't know. I'm not going to say anything against Lubavitch,
no, he's a very nice guy.
especially with Rabbi
Really.
Shimon here. But it's possible that for a person in prison, we go back to what we've heard since we've been children, that the Shar HaNigun is not closed, right? That the gate of song is the type of way you can approach God and connect to them in ways that sometimes prayer doesn't. And it's possible that Shar Nigun doesn't even have words, isn't it? The Nigun, there are no words. It's just the tune itself. The melody itself has a power that I think can be done. All right, so we are also joined by Rabbi Kolakowski's better half here, the Rebbetzin Chava Kolakowski, who is also a chaplain and works primarily, I think, in Rockland State mental facility. I don't know if I've said that correctly. Chava, what did you? I know you've been listening. You've been tapping your toes to this musical, this musical ditties that we've been offering here. What would you like to? What would you like to add to our conversation here?
Accomplished musician before she.
So before I became a chaplain, I was a professional. Actually, before I became from Yid, I was a professional opera singer. But I always there was always a connection between my Yiddishkeit and my spirituality and my music. So when I came to Rockland, I was like, they wanted me to do spirituality groups, but they knew I was a musician. So they were like, oh, can you connect the two? And I was like, absolutely. And I did do groups before COVID, and I actually still do groups now and a lot of them involve just people requesting music, and then we talk about like their spiritual connection to the music because
so you actually
Rabbi Nachman, says that music is taking the good winds and removing the klipas from the bad winds, and and separating those two, and that's how we make a tikkun. So anyway, people will request songs in my groups in the mental hospital, and I can literally see the lines in their face relax as they're listening to the music. And sometimes we get into deep stuff when they talk about, how it affects them spiritually and why they chose it on that particular day. But it always, always, always is a positive benefit. So that's all I really wanted to say.
So Chava, so you actually, using your trained voice, you actually go and sing pieces with them, right? You actually sing.
I'm not really singing, although we do have a music group that I sometimes assist with there in Rockland. A singing group, and sometimes I suggest songs or I help them with training, but my contribution is more, sometimes we work with percussion, or sometimes I play piano, and I have the patients dance to it, or sometimes they talk about songs that move them and I have them perform it, or we just listen to it. So I'm not really performing, but I'm using my musical training to help them express their own spirituality through music.
Well, I can tell you again, this is sort of like off topic, but I can tell you that, I had a sister, of course, and I've spoken about her in this program, who was developmentally disabled and was, a person who had been in psychiatric hospitals, had been in mental facilities, had been unfortunately abused there. And when she was in the in private homes, and I would visit her, this is one of the things I insisted on, was that there should be music constantly being played. And I bought a number of CDs for her, tapes before that. And I tried to get her to go to, it was in the middle of, it was in Jackson, Tennessee. There was one shul there, but it was barely open, and she wasn't able to manage the steps there. So I felt, al pi halacha, Rabbi Shimon, you might find this strange, but I felt she needed stimulation, and I said, take her to an African American gospel church. I want her to be stimulated. I don't want her to just go into a funk of as if she's into a fetal position into herself. And Chava, I'm sure that you feel that as well. There's probably people that are, when you're not playing music, they've put up this, whether they can control it or not, a defense mechanism that they're shielding themselves. They're sort of like totally wrapped in themselves, and the music allows them to break that.
100%. I can actually see them relax or engage depending on their mood, and it's really exciting to see that. And I do think that it's demonstrative of what Rabbi Nachman said.
I should also mention the statement that the student of the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Yisrael of Sklov, writes in the Hakdama to the Takwan Chadet, in the Takwan Chadet in Tishkolim. He writes there that when the power of music, he says, is the power of Tchias HaMesim, because he says you can see what happens when people hear music. They almost automatically begin moving their body involuntarily. a tune gets them going, and they start moving and tapping their toes and even getting up. And he says, when you see a person who isn't a dancer, but all of a sudden the music takes hold of them, he says that's a dogma to the body coming back to life after after the Rebbeinu Shalom will bring us back, brings back the soul. Dancing and being affected by music, in a way, is the unleashing of the unbound energy of life that's within us that can even go beyond death. That's from the Vilna Gaon quoting the Rabbi Yisrael Sklover quoting the Vilna Gaon. So I think, as Rabbi Shimon said about in the concentration camps and where you are in the severely in a facility where you have severely damaged people, look at the power, the salve of music. And of course, this is alachas kama v'kama. I think all of us know how listening to music has been shown to lower blood pressure, has been shown to in various studies, has shown to be corroborated with a longer lifespan. People that constantly expose themselves to music will seemingly able to manage life's difficulties much better, and in terms of having a much longer and hopefully a better life. So I think this is all, it's all of one piece that I think we can pull. And you see this by singers. People generally have an inhibition, and that inhibition of normalcy, of standoffishness, of being scared of the other person, of putting up masks. But all of a sudden, when you sing a song, you can belt it out, and you're able to sort of free yourself. You see that, right? You can see there, and in ways, when people sing, they're able to sort of like uncork in a way that's safe. Normally, we're afraid of uncorking deep emotions because we're afraid of what that's going to do to the people around us, and we're embarrassed by it. But when we all sing a niggun together, you can see, as Chava says, that people's faces change, the lines change, but also we can tap in emotionally to stuff that we've, in a way, been holding in, right? And
couldn't agree more. Yes, absolutely.
So, mates, he saw in a book, I think, Chicken Soup for the Prisoner's Soul. He hand wrote this story and gave it to me, and I put it up on my wall. It was Shlomo Carlebach. He went to visit a prison upstate for Hanukkah, and he made a little concert, and then he went to find every person in the prison to give them a hug. And there was one big tough guy. He said, "Rabbi, please come back." He said, "I need another one of those hugs." He said, "If I would have had hugs like that one growing up, I wouldn't be here now." So it's
once again, Carl, again, Rabbi Shimon, you've gone places no one has gone, but some of those places Carlebach was there even before you, as we say. All right, Chevra, that's it for this week, my friends. We go out with a song. Take care. Be well.
Thanks for joining us for another episode from the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a single episode.